Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining me today for episode 774 of People Behind the Science. Today, we'll be rebroadcasting our interview with our guest, Dr. Alain Cuerrier. Listeners, Alain works at the intersection of plants and people. The projects in his lab focus on understanding how people use plants and how they perceive nature, and in particular, how they may use different plants in their practice of traditional medicine. In our interview, Alain talks more about his research and his life. So I hope you enjoy this episode of People Behind the Science.
Every day, discoveries are made that will change our understanding of the world around us. Dr. Marie McNeely is here to bring you the brilliant minds who are making these discoveries so they can share their incredible stories and take you on an amazing journey. Welcome to People Behind the Science.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of People Behind the Science. I am thrilled to be here today with Dr. Alain Cuerrier. Now, Alain, welcome to our show. How are you today?
I'm doing good. Thank you.
Absolutely. Well, we are delighted to hear that. And I am delighted to introduce you to our listeners. So listeners, Alain is an adjunct professor in the Department of Biological Sciences at the University of Montreal, as well as a botanist and researcher at the Montreal Botanical Garden. He received his master's and Ph.D. in biological sciences from the University of Montreal, and he worked at Harvard University during his Ph.D., and this helped him achieve his current positions. Now, Alain is also a writer and a poet, and he recently contributed to a book on medicinal plants thriving in the Arctic, and he has published a book of poetry in French. Now, Alain, he is here with us today to tell us about his journey through life and science. So listeners, get ready, get excited. And Alain, today we want to get to know you, both as a scientist, but also as a person. So let's start off with talking about what you like to do with your time when you're not doing science.
Well, when I'm not doing science, and that happens, I have a short window of doing what I love to do as well. I'm a writer, as you mentioned. I love to write. I love to read. I love to listen to music. So I also play music, and I've been studying banjo for a couple of years now, and also playing harmonica and percussion.
Fantastic. You've got your own little folk band there. I like it.
Yeah.
So can you play the harmonica and the banjo simultaneously?
Not yet.
Gotcha. You're working towards it, though.
Yeah.
Well, Alain, I love it. Sounds like you have so many fantastic hobbies outside of science. And it's one of the things we like to highlight in scientists. You know, you're not this one-dimensional person going in, doing research every day and doing nothing else in life. You have a lot of other hobbies and passions. So great to hear about them. But next, we are going to turn to the science. Can you tell us a little bit about how you describe what you do to someone who's not in research?
Well, what I do and what I try to get the people to know and understand about my research is that it's really simple. I'm actually working with people to know about their uses of plants, how they perceive nature, what's their relationship and even emotion about how they feel when they see a tree or gather plants, to make a bouquet, for example. And this is simple. I'm between plants and people, which is exciting.
Absolutely. That sounds fantastic. And I'm looking forward to chatting more about your work as we go through the interview. And I think it is really important to highlight this connection with nature, this connection with the environment, because I think as times are changing, as people are moving more and more into cities and maybe getting outside less and less, it's important to really focus on that connection. So do you consider yourself a bit of a naturalist? Do you enjoy the outdoors?
Yes, I am.
Wonderful. What are some of your favorite outdoor activities?
Well, I love to actually just walk in nature, walk in different places, and even go put my tents and spend a few days outside. I love that. I love to ride my bike in countryside as well.
Well, these all sound like fantastic ways to get outside, enjoy some sunshine, perhaps. Mm-hmm. So can you tell us next about some of the forces that motivate you? I know scientists have a lot of work to get done in a day, and I love getting little tidbits of motivation and inspiration. So maybe can you share with us one of your favorite motivational quotes?
That's a hard one. I do have a number of quotes in French, but what I do say sometimes is live and let live somehow, is to me, enjoy life to the fullest. Life is short. And as well, let other people live. And by other people, I mean plants, animals, landscape, for example. So that gets back to my ecological side, thinking about the environment. And we're really lucky to have all those beautiful plants and animals, and we need to be aware of that.
I like it. Live and let live and enjoy the world while you're here. Fantastic quotes. So can you now tell us a little bit about some of the people who've inspired you or motivated you over the course of your career? I know scientists get to work with so many phenomenal people. So who are some of the ones that motivated and inspired you?
I must first mention Rolf Sattler. He's a retired professor from University of McGill, and he was doing really interesting science. He was a plant morphologist, and he was trying to open up that science to incorporate the view of the people, but also the view of spirituality, bringing a little bit of more spirituality into science. And he did that by being really rigorous in what he was doing and bringing more thoughts and not taking anything for granted. Think about the premises of what you're doing and how you can actually improve or broaden that.
Certainly, how everything fits into the big picture almost.
And that was one of my mentors, and also one of my directors while I was doing my Ph.D., Denis Barabé, was somebody who would not be shy, for example, to go and take some courses in mathematics to be able to understand a natural event or plant or that design. So that was wonderful to see somebody who was going and embrace other disciplines. And I think that's important.
Certainly. I think it's great to have these mentors, these people introducing you to science, showing you almost the way to do science in a great environment. It sounds like you had elements where people were almost living science holistically, bringing in all aspects of it and really incorporating it into their lives, their values, and their belief systems, which I think is really important.
Yeah, it is.
So can you rewind a little bit farther, Alain, and tell us about your beginnings in science? Can you tell us what got you interested in science in the first place?
Actually, I don't know. Well, that's true. And you're not the first person who asked me that question. What I can tell you, though, is when I was at secondary school, we had to work on a project, and I used nuclear power and the impact on the environment. And in that same year, I remember doing another project where I was trying to understand the implication of cutting trees and plants near lakes and streams and water bodies and how it would affect the water and the organism living in those places. So from that point, I can tell you the environment was really a key word and a key problem at that time. And that's how I get myself enrolled in biology at the University of Montreal.
Fantastic. So then what took you from this undergraduate enrolling in biology to where you are today? What are some of these key moments that really helped you get there?
Well, being this person who loved the environment, I went into biology, and then I thought genetic is really cool. But then I changed during the years I was the undergraduate to learning about entomology and then plants. And I thought, plants are great, and plants are really the important organism here for us, for many animals. So I went into plant science from there. I really love the ideas of understanding the evolution of the plant world, and then I moved towards that and doing my master's and my PhD as a taxonomist. And within my PhD, when I was at Harvard, I was working and we were looking at different aspects of taxonomy, and that came from folk classification, how people around us, our First Nation, do perceive and actually categorize the natural world. And that's how it got me into the position I have now.
Well, this is very interesting, and I'm sure a familiar story for a lot of scientists and perhaps young and old scientists alike out there. This sort of cycling through different interests when you're trying to find your best fit, your best match in science. And I know I did the same thing. I started pre-med. I contemplated genetics briefly. I ended up in neuroscience and kind of fell in love with a lot of different things in science along the way. So very, very cool to hear about your journey. Now, Alain, can you tell us in a little bit more detail about one of these projects that you're working on now that you are just the most excited about?
Well, there's a number of projects. I think all researchers are really excited about all the projects they're doing. One of the projects I would love to talk about is the one that now we're working on and working with the two nations, the Cree Nation and the Innu Nation in Quebec. And we're looking now at how can we help, how can we implement traditional medicine within those communities. What's the barriers and what's the facilitators of getting those traditional medicine accepted by nurses there, by all the medical staff, and how can we provide some help working obviously in partnership with these people within First Nation. And I think it's now at a point where it's really interesting because we've done a lot of work on diabetes, and to understand traditional medicine can help those who have diabetes. And now we're at the point where all we did before can actually materialize into having either a clinic or how the people see that fit so that those communities still can use their own medicine.
Certainly. And coming from America myself, I know diabetes is an epidemic right now. Is this something where you're finding it is a similarly scaled issue in these populations you're working with?
It is. It's incredible how many people, when you look at the percentage of people in, let's say, just a CRI of EUC, which is the territory in Quebec, well, the rate of diabetes is almost reaching 1 out of a 3 person.
Oh, wow.
So that's important.
So what are some of the challenges that you face? I mean, do you interface directly with these people or do you sort of work through intermediaries? How does that work?
Well, I do work, and I've been working since 2003 with the CRI people, and I work closely with those people. I need an interpreter to sit down and talk with the elders. Some of the elders don't speak English or French. And so the tricky part is get your questions as clear as possible so you get the right answer from the elders. But it's fantastic. And talking about mentors and people, I would add that elders from the Inuit community that I've been working with since 2001 and some of the Cree people have been mentors to me. How they talk about life and how they talk about plants, it's just fabulous. The wisdom that comes out of these people is extraordinary.
Definitely. Well, Alain, this sounds like a marvelous position and a really great opportunity to interface with different cultures to kind of get a new perspective on things. And this is a little different from the maybe traditional laboratory science career that a lot of people think of when they hear of someone being a scientist. So can you tell us what are some of the biggest differences or the biggest changes that you faced when you went from a more academic laboratory type environment into the positions you're in now?
I think one of the challenges is to be able to be more humble about who you are, about what you've done in your life and what you're bringing with you. Just be yourself for a second. Stop being a scientist. Stop trying to come up with the best methodology to interview a person and just sit down, enjoy tea and talk and get that conversation flowing about the problems that he's facing or the community is facing or some of the problems that you see yourself. And be able to change a little bit your own project because of the elders have something to say about, let's say, contaminations. You might have to stop and say, okay, well, I'll work a little bit on this aspect as well. So be able to change things and be flexible. This is some of the challenge. Be respectful of other cultures is something that not everyone is able to do, I believe.
Definitely. Well, I think great point there. Needing to be able to step away sort of from this analytic, quantitative, almost combative way that scientists approach things oftentimes and just sort of be a person, be a human and interact with people and get those conversations started. So great points there. And we've talked about your position and some of the work that you've done. And I'm curious to hear about some of your struggles, some of your challenges, some of your failures. So we've mentioned a few, but I think every science can look back on their career. And there are these moments that are perhaps a little cringeworthy, but times where struggles went on for a while, maybe months, days, whatever it might be. And it was a difficult problem to solve. I think everyone has these failures. And I think it's important to talk about how you got through them and communicate to the world some of the struggles that scientists face. So can you share one of these with us today?
I think every day is a struggle to get access to funding, which is one of the biggest struggles right now, especially when you work on traditional medicine and some of your colleagues don't believe in it. And you're doing your grant proposal, you're sending it to the CIHR, for example, and the jury looking at your proposal are a medical doctor, and they don't really believe in that. Therefore, your own project will get rejected just because it's not part of their own paradigm. And that's a problem that I and my colleague are facing, even for publishing our papers in good pharmacological journals. It's really difficult. And that came from the same perspective where working with crude extract, a full decoction of plants is not something that is acceptable by a lot of our colleagues.
Gotcha.
But we're blessed because some of the Canadian journals do accept those. So we've been blessed by those journals who accepted our papers. And there's also other periodical where you can look to publish your own work. And that's something that myself and colleagues are a little bit struggling now, especially that our federal government don't really believe in things like climate change or things like that, which I'm working on. And that's another level of problems there. But on the field work, I must say that I've been really blessed by being able to contact and connect with the people and going through all my field work without any trouble, I would say.
Gotcha. Well, I think lots of field work researchers out there are jealous of you right now. So
Yeah, probably because of the places where I work.
Understandable. Well, great to hear about some of these challenges and kind of bring them to light. And I think this point that you made about being at the mercy of the biases of the reviewers is something that a lot of people might relate with who are in these maybe alternative medicine types of fields or traditional medicine types of fields. So I think you're definitely not alone out there. So can you give us an example of one of these perhaps traditional medicines or therapies that you were proposing in a grant or trying to publish in a paper that people weren't accepting of?
One of our grant proposals was to work on medicinal plants, and we sent our proposal and it got turned down. I mean, there was a number of points that was raised by the jury. One of the jury even mentioned that he didn't understand one of the key issues that we're raising. And even though he didn't understand that, he said that point was questionable. So if you don't understand, how can you judge it as,
It's not valid, yeah.
Yeah, it's not logical. And a lot of scientists are not really logical when it comes to be part of a jury and judge a piece of work. A lot of them, thankfully, are logical and really good. I've seen that as well. But within that own proposal also, what was really fascinating, it was one of the jury mentioned that we were working on plants, and he was really concerned that we're working on the right plants. And he said to me, well, I feel that there's some lack of rigor here because I'm not sure they're going to work on the right plants, and they should actually start by growing plants from herbarium specimen. Now, if anyone has a way to regrow plants from herbarium specimen, they should go and patent that right away.
Instant millionaire right there.
You can't do anything from herbarium specimen. That's not an option unless really some seeds are there and they can thrive well, but that's not usually the case. And myself being a taxonomist from my background, I know quite well that this is important. We need to make sure that we're working with the right plants and to identify plants. And I think I have the right field for that. And I think the jury was not well based somehow to analyze our proposal. And actually, that's something, people, other scientists should think about sending a letter and saying, well, these are questionable comments. And so we got the fundings just by writing to the grant agency and saying, we believe that we didn't have the right people to look over our proposal. And they said, yes, you're going to get your full funding.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that turned out pretty good, actually.
Yeah. Well, congratulations on taking that difficult situation and turning it around. And what a great idea to go back, especially if you think something has been evaluated unfairly or perhaps by people who maybe didn't have the right expertise for your area. And I think that happens frequently, unfortunately, on these grant review committees. So great solution to that problem. Now, I love talking about successes, and this was sort of a failure turned into a success. But can you share with us, Alain, another success story from your laboratory or from your career? One of these that has meant a lot to you, whether it was a big success or even a little victory along the way.
Well, I'll mention two successes. The first one is actually a success that I got recently. I'm going to have a small congress happening at the Montreal Botanical Garden, and it's going to be mostly for First Nations, getting 30 to 40 First Nations to come and talk about the different concerns that they have about health, territory, plants, the environment, and even you heard about those native women that just disappeared and nobody's doing anything about that. Mm-hmm. So I asked for a short connection grant to be able to get my congress going, and I got the full funding. I was really pleased with that, and I wasn't sure whether being adjunct professor might put you in a difficult position somehow. So that was really great. But maybe the first, and I was really surprised, is when in 2003, we got the grant accepted by the CIHR on working on anti-diabetic medicine with the Cree people. And pharmacologists came to see me and said, oh, I want to work with you. I have this great idea, which I thought was also a nice idea. But we're probably two naive people. And we put up a team and we work on the proposal. And when we got the funding, one of the established scholars working with us came to us and said, it took two naive person to get that together because we were sure we would be turned down. But you came with your smile and we said, well, we'll give it a try. And we got the funding. And we got the funding even in 2006 when we reapplied. So that was really, really interesting.
Well, congratulations. I think sometimes scientists do need a dose of idealism, of this sort of maybe naivete going into it thinking, well, of course, why wouldn't someone give me money for this brilliant idea? And I think you're not going to get a grant that you don't apply for. So
exactly.
You may as well apply,
Yeah.
So fantastic to hear these stories of success. And this Congress of First Nations sounds like a phenomenal opportunity. So when is this going to happen?
It's going to happen from June 18 to the 22. of 2015, just around the corner.
Well, best of luck with that. That sounds like an excellent opportunity to bring people together and share knowledge and share experiences. So we talked about in our introduction how you're a writer and you enjoy reading. And I love getting book recommendations from the guests on this show. So Alain, can you tell us about a book that you've read and really enjoyed?
I think one of the really fabulous books that's out there and not well known, maybe the name of Nancy Turner tells you something. She's a fantastic ethnobotanist from University of Victoria. She published a book called The Earth Blanket, and this is a wonderful book to read. I'm sure you can have access to it from Amazon or any type of places like that. It's fantastic. It's a little bit the story of plants and people there, but the stories of the people and how Nancy interprets those stories, and you can understand how those stories actually bring understanding of the world and how we need to be respectful of the environment. And this is just a great read. And she came up with another book just recently, but that's a bit of a heavyweight with 2 volumes and about almost 1,000 pages. I wouldn't recommend that to everyone, but
it's a commitment, yeah.
Yeah, it's a commitment for people, probably with my own background and work. But for people who love to read something outside of science, I would recommend things like the poetry of Philippe Jacotet. He's a Swiss writer. I'm pretty sure you can find that in English because he's well known. He's probably one of the best poets still alive today. He's probably in his 90s now. He's a fabulous poet, really close to nature. So there you go about the connection with my work. And I love to read what he has to say about nature and his perception. This is important. And I think we can be influenced by those outside of our disciplines and taking those ideas to promote in our own world. Those I would suggest. In French, actually, a year ago, they published almost all of his poetry in one book. And that won't be accessible in English, but I'm sure you can discover a few of his books that he published throughout his life. I would recommend that highly.
Certainly. Well, superb recommendation. So I must ask, was he an inspiration for your own poetry?
He is actually, yeah. He's always around. The book that I'm mentioning is just in front of me right now. He's a big influence on my own writing.
So what got you interested in writing poetry and perhaps reading poetry to begin with?
Actually, I didn't know about poetry until I got into what we call college, cégep here in Quebec province. And so I had a course on poetry, and I didn't know. I never read poetry, and they were asking me to write a poem. So I was a little bit like, wow, okay, what am I doing here?
Does it have to rhyme?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know nothing. And so I went to the library and I got a number of books by Fernando Pessoa and other people that I didn't know. I didn't have a clue what I was reading, whether they were important poets or not. And I discovered a way to understand and thinking outside of the box. And that was really an eye-opener for me. And I said, wow, this is interesting. The way some people would write, this is exactly how we should mention something or describe a phenomenon. I felt like they had the exact words, just like a scientific equation to understand something. I thought it was fabulous. So that got me into writing poetry.
Well, wonderful. I think poetry has an unparalleled ability to really capture the emotion, the movement behind words and phenomena, things like that. So very cool to hear that you've gotten into poetry. And we'll have to check out some of yours. I know you said most of it's in French, but listeners will have to find it and perhaps try and learn a little bit of French to follow along. I love it.
I guess so, yeah.
Well, Alain, wonderful to hear book recommendations and a little bit more about your literary past. And we haven't yet touched on travel. And I think this is one of the things in science that people are really excited as part of the career. And there are some great opportunities to travel and work with different people and different research groups across the world. So can you think back on your career and tell us about your favorite place that you've traveled for science?
I must say that the first place that really got me excited is when I traveled in 2001 as a new researcher at the Montreal Botanical Garden. I went up in the subarctic province of Quebec, so in Nunavik, and that was my first field trip in the Arctic. This was so incredible. And I'm still blessed. I'm still going there. I'm going to the Torngat National Park on Labrador. I went to a number of other communities in the Arctic, whether it's Nunavut or Nunavik. But the first time in 2001 to go, and as a plant taxonomist and somebody who was starting his work in ethnobotany, I was seeing new plants, how plants would cope with the harsh environment they're growing in. That was really fabulous. All the colors, the textures of the plants as well. And it's just fantastic. And obviously things like Oxytropis, Astragalus, those are plants in which we find a number of species thriving quite well in the Arctic. You don't see those as often when you're more based in the southern places. So this was really, I would say, one of my best trips ever.
Well, very cool. And I know myself and a lot of other listeners out there might not think of the Arctic as particularly lush. So it's interesting to hear you describe all these different plants that you see out there. So is this during, I guess, the quote unquote summer of the Arctic, or are they there year round?
Well, it's summer, obviously summer of the Arctic, and that was in July. I believe that I went there because we were opening the First Nation Garden at the Montreal Botanical Garden in 2001, in the first week of August, if I recall correctly. So I was there in early July, I would presume, collecting plants and bringing plants back to the garden to make a little space for the plants from the Arctic. Every places you go as a botanist, you're blessed with different plants and different ways as well to use those plants. And I've been also really blessed by starting a little project in Morocco and in Marrakesh, especially in the High Atlas, where I see how people connect with plants, use plants, different species of thyme, for example. This is fantastic for a botanist.
Definitely. So have you dabbled a little bit in perhaps some of these traditional medicines or cooking with some of these ingredients that you wouldn't find in your area?
Well, you learn. And that part, I'm not exactly a researcher. I'm more a student. I learn from people. I learn to use this plants. I learn to use decoction of tarragon or other fine herbs that thrive in different places. And it's a beautiful way to connect with other people as well.
Absolutely. Well, I love this theme, Alain, of people that keeps coming up in our conversation. And I think the people that you connect with as a scientist make the job so fantastic. And I think being able to share your science with the world is also a wonderful opportunity. And it's interesting to look back on all these different groups that I've worked with, at least over the years. And it seems like each group has its own personality, different traditions, and maybe quirky or funny stories that you can remember fondly from those laboratories. So, Alain, can you help us share the human side of science today and tell us about some of the traditions or some of the funny memories that you've experienced in science?
There's a number of stories, obviously. But I can recall one of the time, and the first time I started to work in 2004, I went to a small community along the mouth of the George River in Quebec. Kenyiswalujuak is the name of the place. And I was interviewing people, and there was this person really well versed into traditional knowledge. His name TV Took, still around, still thriving, really funny guy, a lot of humor. And that's something, Cree people, Inuit people, there's so much humor. It's really fun to work with. And so I was interviewing TV, and in his own place, his children were there, and one of his child came to me, and he has a plate with dried intestine, of caribou intestine.
Oh, wow.
With a bowl of fresh blood.
Ah.
And that was kind of a chip and dips. And so he offered that to me. And when I started to go and grab it, because, as an ethnobotanist, you do have to share the food, the drinks, whatever it is.
Whatever's offered, you take, yeah.
Yeah. Gets you to some troubled places, I can tell you that.
Gotcha.
And then he just pulled away and said, oh, it's a joke.
Oh, my gosh.
So he was joking on me, yeah. I didn't have to actually taste that, but probably would have been really good. I had some intestine before because the Inuit showed me that those were cooked, and I had my share of beaver meat.
Really? What does beaver taste like? Is it similar to anything else?
It's a little bit more stronger, I would say.
Okay.
I was actually doing some work in Mistissini, and there was a big happening, and so the food was shared, and they gave me my plate of beaver, and there was a poor young researcher god from Alberta, and she was vegan.
Oh, no.
Imagine. So you can't be a vegan when you work there. Anyhow, she couldn't touch it. She was just like, oh, my God, it's too powerful, blah, blah, blah. And the poor thing, obviously, I ate my plate and I started to nibble on her plate. And one of the Cree women looked at me and she said, Alain, I'm so proud of you. You're becoming a Cree now. And so, I felt a little bit bad because of that young woman. Mm-hmm. You obviously didn't get that. Hey, you're part of us now. Oh, gee. And so that's something you have to go through. And it's fun after a while. You just taste different things that comes from the ocean or the land.
Your strong stomach will take you far in your field, it sounds like.
Yeah, somehow, you have to have that.
Gotcha. Well, wonderful to hear some of these stories, some of your experiences working with the people. And I think you're right. Anytime you go into a different culture, though, there are sort of unusual foods that you're not used to seeing at home. And it's kind of fun to try them sometimes. And things that you might not expect to enjoy tend to actually be some of the more enjoyable foods that you have when you're there. So very, very cool. So we've talked about some of your work today. We've talked about the research that you're doing now, but I'm curious, Alain, to hear about these questions that you would love to answer if nothing was standing in your way. So Alain, if we took all the barriers out of the way, things like funding, staff, technology, feasibility, not an issue, what is the question that you are dying to know the answer to?
At the point where I am right now and thinking about the work that I've done and the work that I am envisioning right now, question would be, there's so much we still have to learn about the use of plants, minerals, animals, and our perceptions within the language of the people is really fascinating. And I think that even though we think we've covered much of the ground, I think there's so much out there that we didn't have the chance for different reasons. And I would really love to have access to that funding to open up and create a really good team of researchers. I have a number of my former students that I would love to give them a job and work with me and help as well in partnership with different nations around the world, start to build something on a longer basis. And one thing that I came up with the idea of that concept at the same time that Nancy Turner actually thought about the same concept, and it's a cultural keystone places. Those places which are so meaningful for people because they have stories with those places. They go there maybe for fishing or hunting. There may be some graves there, sepulture, and they might even gather medicine from those places. Different aspects. So I would love to sit down and work on that concept, not on a theoretical basis, which I've done and published, but to open up and say, okay, let's sit down together. Let's work. Let's see what is so important, and maybe use those tools to protect the land, protect their land, and protect our land, and protect whatever we can, so we still have access to those beautiful places which are so meaningful for a number of nations and people around the world, and use that as well to educate their own people, the youth. They're losing their tradition, they're losing their language, so to use that also to teach about their language, teach about their traditional knowledge, and then move on and protect whatever we can at this point.
Definitely. Well, I really like this project that you're proposing, this sort of cultural keystone places, and thinking about the intersections of culture and science and how people see the world, I think is really cool. And I think you're in an interesting position, sort of a unique position, where you're able to see the world or maybe get an understanding of the world from a variety of different cultural perspectives. So can you think of, is there one particular, viewpoint or one particular feeling towards something, a plant, an animal, the environment, where it was most striking to you how different it was from culture to culture?
Yes, I do have an example. I must say that sitting down with TV took the late Willie Imudluk, who knew so much about what they call Nunanya in their own language. When working with now, saying that and also sharing some ideas about human beings, about differences. And I remember TV telling me, and Willie told me the same. He said, you're white, they call us Ranunat, and us, we're the same people. And they told me stories about the mosquitoes and how the mosquitoes is important. And they have stories which, behind the story, which is our funny stories, obviously, but behind those funny stories, there's something that feed you to be more respectful about other lives, be it an insect or a tree. And I got the same feeling when I was working with the Cree people and looking down at black spruce. Picea mariana in Latin is a wonderful tree, obviously, thriving in the boreal forest. And for us scientists, there's only one black spruce.
Gotcha.
But then, walking in the forest with a Cree person, they'll tell you there's Inatuk and Chikshigatuk, and even more than that. So,
really?
I won't get into all the details.
Can you tell the difference between them?
Actually, that's a fascinating point. I was with Charlie Etap, really knowledgeable Cree person, and an interpreter, Jason Kunishish. I stopped and I said to Jason, can you ask Charlie to tell me how he differentiated the two? For me, they're all the same tree, same species.
Right.
And Charlie told me, I just know. And reflecting back, that sometimes I do reply that, to some people who say, "Oh, Alain, you know your plants, and how can we differentiate those two plants?" I say, "Well, I know. I can go back to some books and get all the criteria and that differentiate two plants if I need to." But we do reply in the same way. After walking, after talking, and then having Charlie showing me, this is Inatuk, Chichigatuk, Inatuk, Chichigatuk, I understood and got me back to my own ecology class, in which I remember I was taught that black spruce is a bimodal in terms of thriving in two different habitats.
Interesting.
So you have black spruce, which is going to do really well in dry habitats, and then you're going to have the Chichigatuk, which is more in the moist habitats. So that's the difference I can see and I can share. Probably not totally correct, but that seems to align a little bit more with the scientist knowledge that I have.
Well, very cool. Fantastic example, and great to get a little bit of a window into what it's like to have a position similar to yours, to work with different people, to see things, like I said, from different perspectives.
That difference between our two point of view, I turned it down into a master's degree. So I had a student working on that.
Fantastic. Well, I think that is an excellent project. And again, awesome to be able to see things from different perspectives. And we've talked a little bit about your journey through science to get to where you are today. And I think along the way, you meet so many people who help you out as you go through the journey. So can you share with us, Alain, what you would consider the best advice that you've ever received from someone?
Well, I got a number of advice. One of the advice was concentrate on one or few things. Don't go and work on too many things. And I'm not sure I followed that, but, I think it's a great advice. And anyhow, beside that, I think that something that I do say to my student or people that comes to my door and they're not sure about they should continue in biology, for example, thinking that they might not have a job after receiving their degree. If you're passionate about what you're doing, people will notice that and you'll get a job. You'll get ahead of the competition of other people of just doing biology because they don't know where they fit. So I think that if you're passionate, you should follow your road and your path and then go ahead. And at the end, it's going to be good. And what you learn during your bachelor degree or your master's will serve you. And this is not just for biology. What you learn in biology gives you tools to do things or research or project or work in different places. Might not be biology, but it's going to serve you. And that's something we sometimes forget about.
Absolutely. I think having that foundation and even having a broad foundation, you're able to pull things from different fields, from different areas you've worked in and incorporate it into wherever you are now. So it seems like nothing's a wasted step in science. You're able to kind of pull everything together and make it useful. And I think important that you brought up this idea of job concerns. I think a lot of young scientists are starting to worry about the prospects of what's going to be out there, what's going to be available for them when they're done with their training. And I think you're absolutely right. You need to be passionate about what you do. You need to work hard. And I think you will rise above the competition if you really love what you're doing and you're really dedicated to it. So great point there. Alain, is there any other last piece of advice or maybe one last piece of inspiration that you'd like to end on today?
There's so many great students, and this is something we need to stress. All the work that students are doing under our supervision is extremely valuable and important. Thinking of a number of students I had in my career, I got some fantastic people, great minds, funny people. And I think that you need to be confident in yourself, and that's important. And I think some students don't have that, and they don't see all the potential that they have, and that's something people should see. And saying that at the same time, I think that keeping yourself humble will open up doors and open up yourself to other ways of conducting science, of viewing problems as well. Be aware of other disciplines, other fields, and don't be afraid of tapping into whether it's going to be literature, anthropology, architecture. There's things out there that can apply to your own field and bring some new ways of looking at problems.
Absolutely. Well, great points that you made there, Alain. And I think a wonderful note for us to end on. Can you tell our listeners now how they can reach out if they want to learn more about you or your work?
Well, it's pretty simple. Anyone who's going to put my name into Google, I think the first thing that will pop up will be my web page, which is the Plant Biology Research Institute, where I'm based, connected to the garden. They'll have my contact information, my email, and probably even my phone number there. So that's probably the easiest way.
Great, Alain. Well, we appreciate that. And thank you so much for joining us today and sharing a piece of your story.
Well, thank you for having me on your show.
Absolutely. It was a pleasure. And thank you out there, listeners, for joining us as well. We'll see you next time on another episode of People Behind the Science. Your voyage to the lives of today's exceptional scientists has just begun. You can find everything we talked about today, including our guests' favorite books, biographies, photos, and more, when you visit us at www.peoplebehindthescience.com. I look forward to seeing you next time on People Behind the Science.